Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 96 AV discussion. My name is Adam Howell, and I'm the Director of External Affairs with Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. Today, we are really excited because we're talking about something that ties into really what's at the core of everything we do, and that's consumer understanding, knowledge, and overall perception. And when it comes to AV, the AV industry to reach the next level, these things are really so important. It's also important to understand whether the AV industry is keeping pace with or running ahead of consumers in terms of rolling out the technology. So to further our understanding, PAVE has once again teamed with JD Power and MIT for the second annual Mobility Confidence Index study to explore consumer readiness and understanding of automated vehicles. And we have two wonderful people here to walk us through this study. We have Lisa Boor from JD Power and Chaiwoo Lee from MIT AgeLab. To talk about the study's findings and some of the key takeaways. So thank you both for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So, just broadly and to get us started, I wanted to ask you both if you could remind our viewers what the overall goals are for the study from each of your perspectives. So Lisa, you want to go first?
Well, you gave a great intro, Adam, so I'll do my best to paraphrase, but the goal of the Mobility Confidence Index study is really to understand consumer knowledge and acceptance of fully automated self-driving vehicle technology. And it's important that we look at that across multiple modalities of transportation. It's not just personal vehicle ownership. And so our collaboration with PAVE and MIT is very exciting because it really helps to enhance that conversation, because each of our organizations has a different focus, but yet this is an area of interest to all of us.
Mm-hmm. And also to in more detailed objectives that we had was to understand the drivers to acceptance also. So thinking about what are some of the determinants that define higher or lower acceptance, and how are different consumers feeling about self-driving cars. And using this data to find implications for future communication, future education approaches that might target different driver populations and also different usage scenarios.
It's interesting. I think that all of our organizations, I like to, and I use this word a lot, I like to think of this as an ecosystem of people and organizations trying to really figure out the path for the future of AV, and it's great to work together with such amazing partners when it comes to a study like this. And this kind of leads into my next question, because I personally love like data methodology, diving into the numbers and everything like that. So Chaiwoo, can you talk a little bit about how the poll is put together, maybe some of the methodologies behind it?
Mm-hmm. So many of the questions that we had in the survey were carried over from some of the previous studies that we've done at the MIT AgeLab, our AVT consortium, and also from JD Power. So last year and this year, together with PAVE, we combined some of our existing questions and approaches, and also developed a few more new questions in a collaborative effort. So many of the questions that we asked focused on consumers' attitudes toward an acceptance of or comfort with vehicle automation. So we asked about different levels of automation, how people feel about the different levels, how people's degree of acceptance and comfort with different scenarios. And this year, we also had survey questions that were written to cover both current lower level automation technologies and also future higher level automation. And also questions regarding learning methods and preferences for information seeking. And our US sample this year was nationally representative of the population, so we're able to do some meaningful comparisons within the sample too. And we had a pretty good demographic and regional balance as it was balanced to the census.
There's so much good information there. I've looked through it time and time again, and I think that I really want to plug for everybody, viewing today and everybody out there. You can go to any one of our organization's websites. We'll post it in the description here. Take a look at this study, because there's so much more in there than what we're going to be able to get through today, and a lot of really fascinating data points and things in there. So I really just want to plug it all the way and then tell people check it out. It's really great. Lisa, this question kind of ties into our missions at PAVE, JD Power, and everywhere else. Why is it important for industry and consumers to be looking at the public's perceptions of AV now? What is it about this general moment in time that makes this relevant?
Well, the goal of everyone is to ensure that consumers are brought into this modern mobility movement. And so in order to do that, we have to understand where they are today and where we need to go to move the needle. And so understanding their current experiences with technology, with lower levels of vehicle automation really gives us some insight and helps us, gives an indication of where those gaps are in their knowledge, where we as an industry have to help educate and create realistic expectations so that consumers are not let down by the technology.
It's funny that I think that there's so many like metaphors with driving an AV and not leaving the public behind or bringing the public along with us. It's very it very much ties into that whole transportation idea. So this is sort of for both of you. This is the second year PAVE, MIT, and JD Power have partnered on this study. So one kind of obvious question is, what are the trends from 2021 to 2022, and what would you say are the takeaways? Chaiwoo?
Yeah, so the results were pretty similar across the 2 years. So we saw a lot of consistency. For example, when we looked at people's knowledge of where we are with self-driving technologies, their availability, and we still see, continuing from last year, a widespread misunderstanding of their availability. This year, we saw 17% of the sample believing that fully automated self-driving vehicles were already available for purchase, and then also an additional 50% believing that they will be available in the consumer market within the next 4 years. So, and this is pretty consistent with what we saw last year too. What we additionally looked into this year in relation to knowledge and understanding is looking at the different learning methods that people are referring to and info-seeking sources for lower level automations and existing ADAS that people already have, and also for fully automated self-driving vehicles. And we did see some interesting differences here. So for example, the ADAS that people currently have, when we asked questions about how they're getting information and learning about those, people referred to things like the owner's manual and dealer explanation as the most utilized, along with online research. But when we asked about preferences for lower level automation learning, people also cited methods like interactive manuals and demonstrations, in-vehicle tutorials and driver education courses. And for fully automated self-driving vehicles, we see sources like online sources pop up at the top, and also a mix of responses indicating people wanting to seek reliable expert sources, but also using informal channels more. So there's some interesting gaps and mismatch here between the different levels of automation, different types of technologies, and different sources that people are going to, which might all contribute to some of the misunderstanding that we're seeing. So this is something that we're trying to look deeper into as well.
Yeah, I think the learning pathways, that's a really interesting part of this is finding out where people want to and where people are seeking out knowledge in terms of the technology.
And readiness is a big part of that.
Yeah.
So, as we look at these different transportation applications for the technology, we ask consumers to tell us their levels of comfort, whether it's riding in an AV themselves, sharing the road with an AV, public transportation, and then the transportation of goods utilizing AVs. And it's really interesting to see this consistency where consumers they see value in the technology, but it's at this point, their levels of comfort are much higher with the applications that don't necessarily pertain to themselves. So the transportation of goods, the idea of utilizing this technology for those who are unable to drive due to age or injury. So there's definitely this recognition and an excitement around the technology, but yet consumers aren't ready for it themselves necessarily.
Well, and that kind of leads into another question, Lisa. What do we learn from this study about the power of words and descriptions, in general, as they relate to consumer understanding and acceptance of AV technology?
Well, it's really interesting because, we always talk about the power of words. And so we asked a series of questions in which we're trying to get consumers to provide which words resonate with them when they're looking at different levels of automation. And so we gave them, 3 random different definitions of varying levels of automation and asked them to give us the words that they felt associated with each of those definitions. And it's really interesting to see that consumers are really gravitating towards the same terms for some of these lower levels of automation. They're using terms like assisted driving, driver assistance, and semi-autonomous when describing multiple levels of automation. And so they're really not differentiating between those lower levels of automation, which is something that industry does all the time. And so one of our takeaways is this idea that, we have some very technical and distinctive terms that we use every day as industry experts, but those, may be serving the industry well, but they're not necessarily aligning with what consumer understanding is and, where they're gravitating towards.
Yeah, sounds like the zone is sort of flooded with some confusion in terms of the descriptions and things of that nature. So Chaiwoo, what do you think this poll means for the so-called safety case surrounding AVs and the public's perception of the technology?
Yeah, so safety is definitely something that we saw being referred to in the consumer responses, and it's definitely something that is at top of mind for many consumers when it comes to AVs. And what our survey showed was that safety has multiple dimensions, really, in this case. And there was a question that we had in the survey about advantages of using fully automated self-driving vehicles, and what the selected answers include. Along with a few convenience benefits, among the top choices were fewer intoxicated drivers, fewer crashes. So some benefits that people are citing related to safety. But also on the other hand, safety-related cases also made the top of the list for potential disadvantages. So when we flipped the question and asked about what are some of the disadvantages that you see, and people mentioned things like technology failures, possibility of the vehicle being hacked, and also pedestrian and cyclist safety. So it really appears that from the public's perspective, safety is understood from multiple angles, and also from perspectives of different road users.
That makes sense. I mean, it's a concern and a solution, a potential solution in people's minds. I think people can see multiple aspects of the technology in terms of their perceptions. So one of the things that we get asked about a lot, obviously, AV is a global market. It's a global industry, and we get asked about comparisons a lot. So PAVE, MIT, and JD Power gathered information from a similar study launched in Canada earlier this year. Can you talk about some of the key differences between consumer readiness and perhaps the trajectory of the different markets in Canada versus the US?
Absolutely. So we executed the same survey in both markets and just a few months apart. And it's really interesting to see a lot of the same trends across both markets. We know there are some very distinct differences, geographical, cultural differences in these countries, but yet we're seeing the same types of gap in consumer knowledge. We're seeing the same levels, fairly consistent levels of comfort with the various applications of AVs. And there's also a shared recognition among both consumers in Canada and the US that there's a responsibility for operating an AV. And consumers are receptive to this idea of possibly having to take additional training in order to operate one or ride in one. And so I think those are some critical points, as we look at the adoption of the technology to keep in mind. And then it's always interesting. We always have a question that, asks, has anything in the last year occurred to help, form your opinions regarding the technology? And it's really interesting to see this awareness in Canadian consumers of different applications globally and some of the deployments that are happening around the world. So they're not just seeing what's happening within their own market. Consumers are taking note of these applications and deployments around the world. So that's something that we need to take note of as a global ecosystem, right? How does one place impact the other?
So getting into we've got a lot of great audience questions, but one final question for both of you, and we asked this last year. What are the lessons that the AV industry should take away from this study? Chaiwoo?
We keep talking about consumer education, but I can't stress that enough. And I also want to point to some of the findings that we saw regarding consumer knowledge from this survey in talking about education, because it's continuing from last year. This year also, we did see a pretty noticeable gap between actual and self-rated knowledge. And when we presented a list of automation descriptions and asked respondents to select what they would define as fully automated self-driving, only 35% of the sample chose descriptions corresponding to technical definitions of self-driving, and 65% reported that they believe self-driving would involve at least some driver involvement. And we also asked respondents to rate their knowledge of AVs, so doing some self-ratings based on own perceptions. And not a ton of people selected that they know a great deal, but among those who did believe that they know a lot, the vast majority selected incorrect definitions. So there's really not a meaningful correlation between self-rated and actual knowledge, which is important because you have to look at the two sides of knowledge, what people might actually know and what people believe they know, which actually has a bigger impact on their overall acceptance of the technology. So having a consistent messaging and focusing on clarity of the message in consumer education and communication of the technology, description of the safety benefits and potential disadvantages, and really clarifying to consumers so that they have an accurate sense as to what they know and don't know. I think that's a takeaway that we should all be mindful of.
Lisa, how about you? What do you think?
Well, Chaiwoo covered a lot of it, but I mean, we can sit and talk for a while, but obviously we're talking with PAVE and all of you, and education is critical. And when we look at the learning methods, it's very clear that the types of methods that are being used right now and relying solely on the dealer to be that advocate for ADAS learning can't do it alone. We need to ensure that we kind of have a more multifaceted approach to learning, and consumers are really saying, and our study findings show that they are open to more interactive, in-person, learning opportunities. So there really is an opportunity for industry stakeholders of all types, not just the OEMs, to really rise up to that, and to do that in a manner, though, with consistent messaging and with very clear expectations, because the ultimate goal is to ensure that consumers have a sound understanding of the technology and when it will do certain things and when the driver or operator is responsible for certain things.
Yeah, I mean, consistent messaging, that obviously is so important, because you can hear one message from a trusted source, but if you if you hear a very different definition, wording, terminology from another, it's it just increases confusion. So this broad spectrum coordinated approach is so important. So I'm really happy, because a lot of times we don't necessarily get into audience questions, but we've got a few here that I'd like to throw your way. One being, what % of the surveyed population expects fully autonomous vehicles, like level 5 vehicles, be on the market in the near future, say within the next 5 years or so?
So do you want me to take that one, Chaiwoo? Or?
Sorry, I should.
Sure. Yeah, and I already referred to the data a little bit, but Lisa, you can go ahead.
So we have this year in the US, we see 17% of consumers thinking that fully automated self-driving vehicles for personal lease or ownership are available now. That being said, that's incorrect, because we know that they're not available for lease or purchase right now. But the majority of consumers, it's 67%, are of the belief that that AVs will be available for purchase or lease in 4 years or less. So, and then there's always the percentage that say never, which that's always fascinating to me too. So, and it's a small percent, but, and then that's very consistent with what we see in the Canadian market as well.
Okay. And we also asked about their perceptions of availability in the market, not just for personal use, but also transit and in different situations. And across different scenarios, answers were pretty consistent in terms of a lot of the majority of samples saying that they will be available within the next few years.
And just to piggyback on that, one of the things, we have a follow-up question. Should anyone say that any of those mobility applications are available today, we asked them to give an example, because that really helps to get a good understanding of what consumers are thinking is available today. And, we are seeing in examples, correct examples of, public transit shuttles and deployments that are indeed on the road. And so there is a percentage of consumers who are accurately answering that certain AVs are available today. But then we also see that gap, and we see consumers who, as far as personal vehicles that are available for ownership or lease, we see a lot of mentions of Teslas and other applications that, are definitely not fully automated self-driving vehicles.
I love that example question, because it's so hard to really dive into the mind's eye of somebody, when you're talking about a survey or study, and that really gives you an idea and insight into that. What do they see when they hear the term, in their mind? And I think that's such an interesting facet when you read into some of those things. So another question we got in from the audience, what are the key things, and we touched on this a lot, but what are some of the things that industry specifically can do to improve trust for AVs? When you look at things like, if the goal is to have zero crashes, things will happen. How do we best message to help society and understand the concept of the evolving progress of AVs, and what can industry really do in that regard?
Yeah, I think it's really two things. Consistency messaging is, again, very important, because like Adam, like you said, if someone's hearing multiple things from different sources, and if messages are not consistent across different channels, that leads to mistrust of the technology. Another thing is thinking about how some respondents would say things like, I don't know enough about this, I don't have enough data to trust this technology, and thinking about what data people might need and want to look at, and what's understandable, and how do we get them through the right channel so that the data reaches the right consumer. So looking through the different sources of information, and not just looking at what people are using right now, but where people place higher values in terms of trust in different channels. So what are some of the more trusted sources versus what are some sources that people look at a lot, but maybe trust less. So looking at some of the qualities of the different channels and getting the right data through the right channels would be the key.
I think just to add to that, industry needs to start now, and it starts with where we are with lower levels of automation. And so, we talk a lot about advanced driver assistance systems, ADAS systems that are available now. And it's very important that consumers find value in these current ADAS features, because it really does provide a foundation, and it helps build that trust with the technology. And then when they see value in it on a day-to-day basis, that also helps to encourage trust as well as acceptance.
Yeah, it sounds like it or not, the public is building that perception now. That's an important thing that everyone, I think, needs to keep in mind. We talked earlier about how good of there's so much good demographic data in this study, and one question we got in was where might people be more ready for AVs?
So when we look at some of the demographic comparisons that we have, we see, and this is consistent with past years, last year, and before we collaborated with JD Power, some of the surveys that we did on this topic before too. But Demographically, we see that younger adults, people with higher income, higher education, are more accepting of higher level automation in general. What was also interesting, though, is that it didn't exactly correspond to how well they know and understand the technology. So yeah, it's not to say that younger adults and higher income, higher educated people are more knowledgeable, but they're maybe more confident and more accepting of the technology. We also see that people who have higher confidence using technology in general, so not just automotive technologies, but new technologies, digital technologies in general, and people who are more open to that and more trusting of technologies that are out there are also more accepting of self-driving technologies. So the perceptions and experiences really could transfer across domains.
And they're also more, those early adopters are also more willing to seek information from multiple sources, which is critical.
Interesting. So, Lisa, have regulators done enough to reassure the general public about AVs, or is there a bigger role to play from regulators in this space in terms of trust and perceptions?
Well, I mean, the issue of regulation is definitely part of the ecosystem, right? And as we look as a whole of the different stakeholders, they're definitely part of the puzzle. And I think, you know, our message is the fact that no one entity in this ecosystem can do it alone, and it truly has to be the messaging and the language that's used by all stakeholders that is bringing this technology forward and ensuring that consumers are definitely that they have a sound understanding and that they're able to bring it into their everyday life.
So I'm going to try to sneak in one last question as we round out the panel, and it's an interesting one because it's I think it's something that a lot of people wonder about, and it's that the first AVs on the road, they're likely to spark a lot of curiosity, maybe attract some people that would get into vandalism or try to you know, sort of mess with the vehicle, so to speak. What are your thoughts on the public's interaction with AVs in the coming years?
So I'll speak a little, I mean, go first, but we've had the opportunity to work with some of the actual deployments of a few AV shuttles. And it's really interesting to see, you know, riders are curious. They're definitely interested in the data and they're interested in experiencing themselves. So that as a whole is a very positive thing for all of us, right? We have curious, interested consumers who are seeking information. And so that's a great thing to see. And every experience helps grow the consumer's understanding. And so whether it's big or small, whether they see it in action, read an article in the media about a deployment, or experience it personally, all of those experiences count. And so ensuring that the expectations are clear is very critical.
And I'm probably not answering the question precisely, but I think we could also look back at some of the other recent technologies that have entered the roadways. So thinking about electric vehicles, thinking about level 2 technologies, and the implications for consumers might not be as strong as those that fully automated self-driving cars might have, but thinking about when these technologies entered the market, what were some of the reactions and how did we see them being distributed and being perceived by different road users? So I think we could also learn some lessons from what we've seen in the past.
Definitely. Looking at the analogs is always going to be an important lesson for the future. Well, thank you both so much for joining today. We're out of time. I know that we could talk about this for hours and hours, but I do encourage everybody to go online, check out the study, check out the report and the data. It's fascinating, and there's so much out there to learn from. So Chaiwoo, Lisa, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And just a reminder to everybody, you can find all of our other panels on our website, thepavecampaign.org, and we'll have this and many other episodes up on our podcast titled The PAVEcast. And just thank you all for joining us and spending a little bit of your day, and take care.